So with this, I welcome you to our Get Ready For It 29th online gathering for congregational leaders across the country. This time is sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jill Beverlin. I am the National Coordinator of Coaching for the ELCA, and I'm one of your facilitators today. As we begin, it's important for us to be reminded that this time is meant to be a safe and brave space for church leaders to bring the truth of who they are and how they are doing. These conversations are an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. Today we will hear several voices that will be speaking into the space of the importance of churches growing young. And if you think by this, we simply mean getting more people of a certain age to sit their butts in our pews, well, friends, you're in for a wonderful surprise. And with this short framing, I will introduce to you our first speaker, the Reverend Dr. Phil Hirsch, Executive Director of the ELCA's Domestic Mission Unit. Phil, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. I have been a parish pastor for 30 years in the ELCA, and I am now working at Churchwide. And I have been familiar with the Growing Young material since I was a DEM in the Metro DC Synod. We gave a copy of this book, which I think somebody will talk about, to every one of our churches. And I know other synods have been doing the same. We did this because we understand that the purpose of the church, one of the ways to describe it, is to share the gospel, the way of Jesus, with as many people as possible. And we are hoping that people will come to know the way of Jesus and share in that community and justice and love and forgiveness that we know of in Christ. However, the truth of our reality as a church, and it's not only us in our denomination, but it's across the board in the United States, our way of doing this has been working less and less well. And in fact, our congregations have been growing older and not more diverse at all, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Are we showing some of these slides? Let's bring a slide up. It is the job of a leader. I think it was Peter Drucker who said first that it was the first role of a leader to define reality, although I think it's attributed to somebody else in the slide deck. So I'm going to do a little reality defining for us. And hang on to your hats. Just if you're not sitting down, sit down. If you've seen these slides before, it's not a big shock. If you haven't, you're going to know them to be true anyway from your own experience. And I can't see the slides. Are they up? No.
Rachel, you'll need to share your screen again.
Okay. Let me first say about the age of our membership in the ELCA. It's something we don't have hard data on. There's some difficulty in getting that number. What we do know is the average age of the reader of the Lutheran magazine, which I think is 74. And we kind of extrapolate back from that to think that the average age but that skews a little older. We think that the average age of the membership in the ELCA is maybe 10 years under that. So it's in the 60s, we think. And you can see anecdotally from your experience in the church, unless you're in a particularly younger congregation, that that's probably accurate. And yeah, there it is. Max Dupree is, I guess, the first one who said it. So here's what it looks like in the ELCA. Baptized membership, I'm just going to go through these quickly. Baptized membership has been in decline. We lose about 95,000 people a year in the ELCA. And that means about 2 synods worth of people no longer consider themselves ELCA Lutherans, are no longer following Christ as a part of our ELCA community. And along this line, a quarter of our congregations reported no baptisms. Half of our congregations, 51%, said that they received no new members through affirmation of faith. And so although our purpose is to share the gospel, our way of doing that has, like I said, been working less and less. Let's go through them. We're going to go through them very quickly. And if you extrapolate, look at the middle line here. Don't pay attention to the upper or the lower ones. Those are just statistical. But the number to pay attention to is that middle line of baptized membership. That's where we're headed. And so by 2050, that's down to about a synod or two's worth of members. And of course, we don't do the growing young or anything because of a decline, but because of our calling of Christ to reach people with the gospel. And we have to admit the truth of what's been happening, and then do the faithful thing, which is adjust the way we do our ministry. All right, let's go a little further. Weekly worship attendance is dropping even more dramatically, and there are reasons for that we don't fully understand. This does not include COVID, of course, which throws us all sideways. But we know participation is less. Weekly worship attendance, the projections there go down, and many people don't think this is possible. I assure you it is. Ask the people at Kodak or at Sears. If you don't make an adjustment, if you don't change the way that you do things, our product is awesome. The Christ that we know of and love is so wonderful. And we have this tradition in the Lutheran Church of understanding a few core principles, and everything else we call adiaphora, we should be able to adjust and find new ways to connect. So let's go a little further. And this is the average attendance again in a different way. So let's go one more slide, and let me just say that the direction of the ELCA is in the pathway of helping us to all think about new ways to connect with new people who are younger and more diverse than we are now. Now, of those three things, new, young, and diverse, often people like two of the three. I would suggest to you that either we're going to be successful at all three of them or at none of them, because all of them have the similar kind of principles. And what you hear of in growing young is simple ways to have empathy for others, to lead by listening, to be clear about the message of the gospel. All those things will help us in every way that we seek to be church together. So thank you. And Jill, you're going to continue, I think, with an interview around growing young.
You bet. And Phil, thank you for that great framing. And we hope to be modeling by and leading by listening today. And so with that, I am thrilled to introduce to you our two young adult speakers for today. Daniel Kirschbaum finds deep joy in dreaming with people and organizations about systemic ways to be radically welcoming and holy space co-creators. What a great phrase, eh? Daniel is currently the Director of Retreat Ministries at Rainbow Trail Lutheran Camp in Colorado. He's also the Registrar for Abide Small Group Ministries, and on the side, he's finishing his Master of Arts degree with Wartburg Theological Seminary. His call in ministry moves him towards people who have experienced trauma as a direct or indirect result of the church, specifically in relation to gender and sexual identity. Claire Emble, our second speaker, is a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is a writer, photographer, and graphic designer with an eye for the beauty of the world and a passion for justice. Claire considers herself a faith-based activist who uses the social justice message of the gospel to be an advocate for all people. She hopes to be an ELCA pastor one day. You keep going, Claire. And I can't go by without saying, in a conversation yesterday, I also learned that she is capable of attaching Lutheran theology to pretty much any Disney movie. So listen for that in her sharing. So Claire and Daniel, thank you for being with us and being willing to share your stories. Not only are we honored to hear the truth of who you are and what your journey has been like with communities of faith, I believe your sharing will really help us frame the work we are set to do in growing young in our denomination. So we have several questions that we are dying to ask you. But before we begin, I want to acknowledge that it's always difficult to introduce someone else, and I want to make sure that our audience today is hearing what is important to you. So within the framework of introductions, what else might you both want to add so people know the truth of who you are as we begin talking today? And Claire, I'll invite you to share first.
I feel like we really covered it. I right down to the Disney stuff. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's a lot else to add.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let Daniel go if he has stuff to add.
Okay, you go, Daniel. If there's something else you want to add before we jump in.
Sure. And I'm going to add it on behalf of both of us because I asked Claire if I could earlier, which is to say that in preparation for this meeting, we were asked to be truth tellers, and I will let you all know that both Claire and I, both as colleagues in the church and as friends, pride ourselves on truth telling. And so I am just going to put that out there for you at the beginning. So I hope that you enter in with open hearts and know that what we have to say isn't to be aggressive or forceful, but we are going to be truth tellers.
Okay. Yep. Thank you for sharing that deeper part of your truth, your mutual truth. So our first question is, how welcoming does your congregation and the wider church feel to young adults? And Claire, again, I invite you to respond first.
Yeah. So I feel like congregations feel really welcoming only if you come to them first and if you promise not to shake anything up intentionally or unintentionally. And so for someone like me, that can be really hard because I shake things up just because I walk into a room, both like in who I am as a person, but also I'm a Black woman in the ELCA. Like I automatically walk in and things are different for me when I walk into churches that don't have any other Black people or people of color in general. And then I also just don't see a lot of outreach to young adults. Like I feel like the church can be really welcoming if you come to them, but a lot of young adults don't even know where to start with that kind of stuff. Like the outreach just isn't there. It's like, we're here if you find us, but like, I don't think people understand how hard they are to find and how scary it can be to like be the new person, especially in a congregation. Like, you know, I think we joke about it a lot, but like, imagine if somebody sat in your pew. Like, do you know how many congregations and people I know that are part of Lutheran congregations that wouldn't react to that well? Like, I think congregations are really welcoming for like a few people and that's it. So, I mean, the short answer is not welcoming at all.
Okay, thank you for that truth. Daniel, I saw you smiling a lot, so we'll let you expound.
Yeah, well, I just think Claire's great, so I'm just going to cheerlead her forever. But what I would say is that folks are certainly excited when young people walk in the door, which is great. And getting excited about me being there, I hate to break it to all of them, is not what welcoming looks like. In my role as director of retreat ministries, hospitality is like quite literally my profession right now. And just being excited I'm there isn't enough. So I'm just going to say that in the front end. But for me, a sense of welcome looks like belonging, and it looks like peers, and it looks like being ministered to, looks like having space to be together. It looks like being involved and invited, but not expected to do things or to, I'll say more about this later, but to be in a service or work role automatically. Yeah, so I mean, I feel there's excitement in my presence, and maybe it's a lack of tools, or I don't know what it is, but welcome is different. My like sassy comment would be that for every youth trip I get asked to chaperone, I'd like for them to pay for me to go to retreat with other people my age, just as like a measuring tool to work off of.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, thank you for that beginning framework. And so as a follow-up to this, what things could our congregations and the wider church be doing that would make young adults feel more fully welcomed? And Daniel, I'm going to bounce this to you first, just so we're equitable.
Great. I think I said it in some capacity, and I want to add to that. I think young people, right, I won't speak for our youth. I will speak as a young adult, which I define between 18 and 35, but I would also I would say that some of my peers have children, and so they fall in the realm of family ministry, and so the welcome that they feel might be different than the welcome I feel as someone who doesn't have children and is newly married. And so I think that there's that, but I do think belonging comes with feeling like there's other people that look like me there, or that are my age, or that have similar language. I do like being invited to things that exist. Quilting is great. I have fun. It's a great time, but it's not my primary way of spending time. And so I think thinking about finding primary ways I spend my time and engaging me in that way feels great. I think the other piece of feeling welcome as a young person, at least right now, is that we're pretty engaged in the public sphere, and we also are pretty hard to fool. And so part of who I am is, as just a young person, and who my peers are, is that we look at how energy and power and finances are being distributed, and that matters to us, not just how we experience it, but how it's actually happening. And we're critical thinkers and inquisitive, and so welcome has to be systematic and not just performed.
Excellent, excellent. Claire, my friend, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of echo a lot of what Daniel said, but a big thing for me is creating programming for young adults. But also, like, I feel like for a lot of congregations, that's a really big step, because the bar is non-existent as far as young adult programming goes. And so I would just like to start with congregations. I would like to start with congregations being like including young adults in their already existing programming. Like, if your Bible study is at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, that tells me a lot about who you expect and want to come to your Bible study, because I don't know a single young adult that can come to Bible study at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. That's for like stay-at-home parents if they can find childcare, which is a big if, and retired people. And so it's like, what I'm learning from your congregation is that you don't actually want me to come to Bible study. Like, that's not of interest to you. And so just making sure that like you're including your young adults in your already existing programming. And then on top of that, creating programming that does speak to young adults. And then expanding a little bit more on what Daniel said, for me, a big thing is going to be budget. Like, the church-wide budget for young adults is pretty small. And then most congregations don't have one at all. Like, you have a youth budget or like a children and family ministry budget, but there's no budget for like young adults. And so I wonder what it would look like that, like, if next time an endowment came into your congregation, like if that went 100% to young adult programming, or like if for 4 weeks of your like weekly giving that went to young adult programming. Like, it's just, to me, like, you can tell so much about what people care about by where they spend their money. And I don't see it being young adults. I think that's super rare, especially at the congregational level. And then the last thing that Daniel's already mentioned, I just want to echo, is like being engaged in public ministry. We care so deeply about social justice, and not just the social justice that feels easy, right? I know a lot of churches are doing things around homelessness and hunger, and to me those are very like safe justice issues. Like it's hard to like say that you just want people to go hungry. Like it's not very dividing. I want to see congregations do work that is dividing. I want to see people do work on racism and anti-racism. I want to see people doing work on LGBT inclusion, and I want to see work on like inviting women in ways that aren't just like married women, right? Like, things that are comfortable to us. So I just think like having some of those tough conversations is really important to us too. And we're not going to feel welcome unless we see that work being done.
Okay. Some great truth being told here, friends. Love it, love it. And so Claire has really set us up well for our next question. How well does the average person in your congregation and the wider church empathize with you and your friends? And in what ways could they do better? So it's just a little bit different lens, the lens of empathy. What's your experience?
Should I start?
Please.
Okay. I don't think that we as a church really know how to empathize with young people at all. I think it's works really well inside the church for the most part. But like outside the church, I don't see it. Like I don't think we know how to empathize with young people that aren't in our church walls. And I think that's because empathy requires a lot of active listening. And I think we're starting to do that, right? Like Daniel and I are here. I have proof that like we're starting to do that. I just think like we have a long way to go. And so I think for me, like to kind of be better at empathy, I need to see two things. I need to see a lot of self-education, right? Like not expecting young people to educate you, like not expecting, specifically in my experience, Black people to educate you, but just to like kind of do that work on your own. There's so many resources for that. And then also decentering yourself in the conversation, right? Like already our church is 96% white. So already it's going to be really hard for a lot of people and a lot of congregations that I walk into to understand my experience. That's already going to be difficult because I just have a really different experience of faith because of what I look like and who I am. And so like already like there has to be some self-education about that. And then just decentering, right? So like I think that to decenter yourself, you have to be a really active listener. And then like I need to see a less comparison of experience, right? Like to take, once you've done the listening, to take young people's words at face value without comparing it to your experience as a young person. Like, well, that wasn't what things were like when, I was doing it, or like kind of being able to say like, that's not how we do things here. Well, like maybe we need to do things differently. So I think for me, like the biggest part of empathy is going to be that self-education and then decentering as you have conversations with young people.
Excellent. Thank you. Daniel.
Thanks. Get it, Claire. I first want to say that I so appreciate this space, and just want you all to know that if at any point you've had the thought, I feel like young people don't listen to us, that A is part of the problem, but B, I promise you that the social emotional learning happening in schools is really different when we went through school, and we really are good at listening. In fact, we have to like listen without talking for several minutes at a time, just like as part of class. So I'm just gonna say that to start. But my congregational experience, I do feel like there was like movement towards empathy. I don't know that I saw a lot of action towards it, but I did see, I think, true movement towards empathy in my congregational experience. In my experience with the larger church, I'm really blessed to be in the Rocky Mountain Synod, and I feel like I have synodical leaders, not necessarily that seek me out, but when I do show up in spaces, listen. Both, I think in general, I'm excited that there's a young adult ministries program that exists in our church-wide office. But I think they've done some really awesome things in the last few years. I was called a prophetic young leader, which is the first time I've been lifted up in that named way at a young adult discernment retreat. And that mattered to me. And I think our Abide small group ministries, if you don't know what those are, I encourage you to go look at the Young Adult Ministry Facebook page immediately after this call and invite everyone you know. But I think that space was a response by young people for young people, and that's great. And I'm glad there's resources to make that happen. But not all congregation or synod leaders have young people in leadership roles to do that. So either that needs to happen, or we need to do some more work on understanding what's necessary and needed. I think a great example Claire said earlier, which is, what time are you having things and where are you having things? Is it in your building? Is it on Sunday morning? The last piece I'll say is that there's a lot of barriers to empathy that is true empathy. I think there's movement towards empathy, and then I think there's having the tools to really do empathy. One is the assumptions that we carry from different generations, which is true of all of us. The second is the language that we use, right, to talk, because I have a different set of language that I use with my friends, and then I show up in spaces at church and I use very different language depending on the age of the people I'm around. And I think my understanding of who God is fundamentally different because of my age and experiences. We grew up also in kind of a middle zone between a really heavy technology world and a not so heavy technology world, and being in that middle space. I don't have a TikTok, Claire has a TikTok, right? If you don't know what TikTok is, there's a piece of research for you after this. And I think holding that middle space is really interesting too. So thanks for asking.
Great. Well, friends, we're going to pass the baton now to Rachel to bookend our speaking time today. But just want to take a second to really applaud Claire and Daniel for sharing their truth, for helping us expand and change our assumptions about young adults. And I wish I could have a discussion with each one of you to hear how that's happening already. So Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire and Daniel, for being with us today and starting this great conversation about growing young. Our church, as Phil showed you, has made this a priority. And I just want to tell you, I have been doing youth ministry for a long time, and it's exciting to be now part of a church that is putting an emphasis on our youth and our young people and our young adults in the church. And it is a proud moment for me. So I want to tell you a little bit about growing young. And over the next 6 months, we're going to be talking about strategies. I'm going to share those with you in just a few minutes. That I hope we can dig into every month, into these strategies and talk about them and how you can use them in your congregations. But before we do that, let's just talk about what a growing young congregation is. It's a congregation that's engaging young people, and it's a congregation that's growing spiritually, emotionally, missionally, and sometimes numerically. And let me see if I can get my screen to move. There we go. So to give you some information, Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California has a youth institute, the Fuller Youth Institute. And over a period of years, they did research, 10,000 hours worth of research on congregations that were bright spots, congregations that were doing a great job at youth and young adult ministries. This is just a little bit about, you can see on my slide here, the denominations that were involved, the institutions that were involved, and the churches that they studied were growing, and they were engaging a large number of young people relative to their size. It didn't mean that they were a big congregation. Some of them only had less than 50 people in them, but they were doing a good job at reaching and engaging young people. And that's where they gained their knowledge from this study. This is a little bit more information too about the diversity of this study. There were 21 major church traditions, including ours. The congregational size, like I said, varied. The racial makeup of these congregations varied. Parts of the country, they met with congregations in all areas of our country. And then the age. You think it's just a new congregation that is going to attract young people. No, there were older historic congregations that were attracting young people as well. And then finally, the communities that they researched where they found these congregations at. It was a mix. It was just hard to distinguish that one group or one place was better than the other in regards to reaching young people. So that gives me hope, and I hope that gives you hope too as well, that no matter where we are in our ministries, in our churches, we can reach young people. So I've got a little video for you from a friend of mine, so I'm going to show this to you right quick. But this is really important for you to hear. This is what growing young churches are not.
2012 through 2015, Fuller Youth Institute conducted an extensive study of more than 10,000 hours, 1,300 interviews, and 250 churches. The study was cataloged in a book they released called Growing Young, which I highly recommend that you pick up. In the book, the authors walk through the essential strategies to help young people discover and love your church, 6 in total. And what's great about these 6 strategies is that they're all based on the research that they conducted. Of course, when you do that much research, though, not only do you discover what does work, but you also discover what does not. And throughout the 3-year study, Fuller identified 10 traits that might seem important to reaching young people, but really simply don't matter. And I want to walk you through 7 of those traits in this video. If you want to discover the remaining 3, make sure you go out and pick up Growing Young, the book. Again, highly recommended. With that being said, here are the 7 traits of churches that don't affect how well you can reach young people. Number 1, a precise size. The Fuller study found no statistical relationship between church size and effectiveness, so you don't need to be a mega church to reach millennials. Number 2, a trendy location or region. Of course, the study did find churches successfully reaching young people in booming metropolises, but there were equally robust ministries in suburban and rural locations. Number 3, an exact age. Maybe you're a brand new startup church, or maybe your church has been around for more than a century. Maybe it's somewhere in between. Here's the good news. The age of your church does not appear to have a reflection on how well that you're able to reach young people. Number 4, a specific denominational affiliation. Whether you're evangelical, non-denom, mainline, or something else, there's no need to fear that your denomination will be a barrier to reaching millennials. The Fuller study found plenty of churches from all denominations and traditions that were connecting with young people in their communities. Number 5, an excessive cool factor. Your pastor and leadership don't need ripped jeans, oversized tees, or to use the word savage, salty, or shade in their next message to connect with young people. Being cool does not equal connection with millennials. Number 6, a big modern building. Also, something you don't need. In fact, the majority of the effective churches studied by Fuller gathered in decent but not spectacular spaces. For young people, the feeling of being in community and real relationship transcends any structure. Finally, number 7, a big budget. Guess what? You don't need one. The Fuller study found that when it comes to reaching young people, a small budget does not equate to a small impact. Now, like I said, there were 10 total traits identified in the Fuller Youth Institute study that do not affect a church's ability to reach young people. We just hit 7 of them, but of course that means that there are 3 more. So make sure you pick up that book I mentioned, Growing Young, to discover the remaining 3. To recap, these are the...
Thank you, Jason. I tell you what, if you will just keep on sharing the slide, because we'll just, if you don't mind, just post to the next one. So I guess you're wondering what those last three are that they found, qualities that your church does not need to have. The first one is contemporary worship service, or something hip and cool worship service. The second is a watered down teaching style. Don't do Jesus Light instead. And I think Claire and Daniel would probably nod their heads on this. Talk deep, discussional, deep conversations about life is what these congregations were doing. And then finally, you don't have to have a hyper entertaining ministry. You don't have to have the rock wall. You don't have to have the lights and all of that. So anyway, I hope that hearing these 10 qualities that your church does not have to have gives you a little bit of, gives you some comfort, because you know what? We can all do this. We can all grow our congregations younger together. It's a matter of engaging them, engaging our young people and the folks that are in our communities. So now we're going to break into small groups. And we have 4 questions for you to talk over. The first is, how have young people added vitality to your life and to your congregation? And if you can get through that one, that would be most important. And then, have you seen signs of aging or shrinking in your congregation or ministry? And then, who else should be invited to join this conversation with you in your ministry context? And then finally, what is the most faithful step that you can do next? So we will break out and return back, I believe, at 1:50. Jason, is that correct? 1:55? Okay, awesome.
Everyone from the rooms. We're going to mix it up a little bit just because of where some of us have to be. So I'm not sure if you saw in the room, in the chat, where Jill announced for next week, if you want to join us, Dr. Larry Clark and Dr. Richard Stewart will be bringing us Black Lutheran History Part 2. And Rachel, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, everybody, for the conversation. I'm sure in your breakout rooms, I'm sure it was fruitful. And I'd love to hear from you about some of the answers to the questions and what you heard from one another. So if you'll share those in the chat, that would be great. I want to close us today with just the impact of the strategies that you're going to be learning are going to will challenge young people, in fact, all people, with Jesus's messages in ways that will inspire them. The impact of the strategies will also develop younger leaders intentionally through natural leadership opportunities. Your congregations are going to feel warmer, where everyone feels welcome, and not like what Claire and Dan said earlier. And then finally, you're going to be a better neighbor to those in your community. You're going to see your neighbors in a different way. And so this is just a few of the impacts of the strategies that Fuller has seen and that we are beginning to see now as congregations and the ELCA are tackling them. And I'm sure you're curious. This is just a preview of what we're going to be looking at. So there is keychain leadership there, and that's next month. Then there's empathy, which we talked about a little bit today. Jesus's message and how important that is. Warm relationships, prioritizing young people everywhere, and then of course being the best neighbors. So each month, like I said, we're going to be focusing on one of these strategies. You're going to hear stories from young people and congregations that are working on these strategies in the ELCA. And then you're going to be able to discuss with one another how you can implement these in your own context. And I want to close with this. In the last days in Acts, God declares that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my spirit, and they shall prophesy. I am so excited. My hope is that as we begin to learn these strategies and incorporate them into our ministries, and we begin to connect with people in our neighborhoods and with young people and with each other across all generations, that we're going to grow spiritually, we're going to grow younger, we're going to be more vibrant, and together we're going to do this. We can't do it alone. So let's change the course of those graphs that Phil showed us at the beginning, because there's a lot of people out there in the United States that don't know Jesus, and we have the best story of hope in the world. So anyway, let me look at the chats, and I think we are right at our end time, Jason. So
yes. Did you have sort of a closing, or was that it?
That's I have one more final thing I want to bless you guys with as you leave. It's one of my favorite blessings that I share with youth when I meet them. I want you to hear this. Christ has no body now but yours. No hands but yours. No feet but yours. Yours are the eyes through which compassion must look out on the world. Yours are the feet which Christ is going to go about doing good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses us now. So go in peace, my friends. You are the body of Christ.
Amen. For those of you who want to stay on for a bit, I will be helping to transition us into that time of continued conversation and closing with some prayer. So if that's your desire, stay on. If not, we'll see you next week.
And we do have Daniel who is staying with us, so thank you, Daniel.
So I'm curious, what were the highlights that shimmered for you as you listened today?
I mentioned this in our group, and I'll mention it again. One of the participants in our group, or there were actually 3 people in our group who had been involved in congregations that were also associated with campus ministry. And they all named how important that was in the faith life of those congregations. And then one of the participants made a really interesting to me, observation that depending on the age of your pastor, you have 10 years on either side to have, kind of like a vibrant congregation, or the possibility of a vibrant congregation. And I just thought that was really interesting.
How does that land for the rest of you? Does that seem to be right, that 10-year kind of either side? Daniel, what's your experience as pastor-led congregations and age?
I'm curious if that means that 10 years on either side of the pastor is the age group that feels most vital. Is that what that meant?
Help me out here, the others who were in that group.
I understood it to mean that there's just kind of a gravitational pull that emerges as the pastor is there for a while. That, whatever congregation was there when the pastor arrived probably mostly stays, But if it's a pastor, you know, a 35-year-old pastor who comes in after a 65-year-old pastor retires, you will gradually see the people who are coming in and staying being within that 20-year span of age around the pastor's age.
Got it. Well, then
that was new to me too. I was very fascinated
Sure.
by that observation.
I'd be curious to see the research because I would fervently disagree. The age of the pastor, for me, and I think in potentially broader context, doesn't have to have any effect on the age of the folks being there. I think some pastors lean into their age more than others, but I think a pastor truly living into their call of word and sacrament is someone who is sharing Jesus. And I don't know, I think young people want to hear about Jesus. The pieces that get in the way for me are pieces that we hold, I think, deeply in a lot of, not all Lutheran churches, but a lot of especially Norwegian and Germanic and Scandinavian churches. Some of those pieces get in the way for me, but Jesus has never gotten in the way of me wanting to be a part of a church body or a church community. And I would say that's pretty true of my peers. I would say that we'd like to hear about the Holy Spirit more, which Lutherans are not always the best at. I think you may have heard the line, "I'm not religious, I'm spiritual." It's one I hear over and over again from my friends. I'll share with you that being gay and young and on Tinder is a really interesting experience when you share that church is a part of your life. And people then, of course, have to apologize for themselves as you're having that conversation or feel they need to. But yeah, I'm spiritual, not religious comes up a lot.
Daniel, the challenge for me in hearing you and Claire, it seems that there are at least two important phases in terms of young people coming into a congregation. One is them even knowing about the congregation and its presence, that it even exists and that they might be welcome there. And then secondly is when they show up, what is the atmosphere that they find? Do they find other young people there? Even if they don't find other young people there, do they find people willing to engage with them on a very authentic level? And I'm less concerned about the second from the perspective of my church, which is a downtown San Diego church, and it fits that older demographic, white demographic to a T. But I'm less concerned about us on that second one than I am about the first one, which is just how do we even make our presence known in a way that lets people know it would be okay, it would be safe to come here, to show up.
I'm curious how your congregation...
And I don't know if here is the congregation or if it's some other forum, but
yeah.
I'm sorry, your question?
No, I'm curious. My response is a question, I guess, which is I'm curious in what ways, and I don't know, but is your congregation engaging in things outside your church, which I'm sure you are to some degree, especially in that urban setting.
It has a very active outreach to homeless and disadvantaged people.
Yeah, so I would say being mission minded in itself, I think, is a step. But I do think that even though the churches that are growing, one of the things was not like a cool hip location, that doesn't make your church grow or not. I do think having presence in spaces where young people are is important. And I don't, that could be a gym. I think that could be a bar. I think that could be a yoga studio, but I don't have answers necessarily to where all the spaces young people in your town are, but I wonder that if that study is talking about that the church doesn't move and, their new base is a bar downtown or a coffee shop downtown, but that at least there's presence in those places. And I don't know. And I don't have.
And what does presence look like, Daniel?
Sure. That's a great question. I found a Bible study of people I really love because they were around a table at a bar and they had a Bible out, and I was like, what the heck is, I walked up and said, what's going on? And they told me. And then I studied with them for, a few years. I also think that as a young adult, especially in quarantine world, we're trying our best as young adult ministries at the ELCA office to network with folks virtually and then connect them to spaces that are nearby them. So that when they have a landing space when we start meeting in person again. But right now there's a network of over 1,000 people engaged in, there's over 1,000 young adults engaged in virtual small group ministries. And those are the ones that have said, like, of the 1,000 isn't all of those people, but 1,000 of them have said, I want to be engaged in young adult ministry in my synod or in my local context. So there's hunger and interest, it exists. And so, yeah, I think the finding is true, but I also think word of mouth is huge. So don't lose the ones you have.
Thanks, Daniel.
And I think it's, again, I think, I'm not sure if it was Claire, if it was Daniel who said it, but I think it's making sure that you involve young adults and youth in the activities that you are already doing. So don't exclude them from those activities thinking that they don't want to participate, but find ways to include them, whether it's worship, whether it's Bible study, whether it's whatever it is, just find ways to invite them to come. Just like, we, basically have been doing these webinars about different pieces, but it's also good to hear from, a variety of different people who are, sharing from different perspectives. So then you get to, a chance. The other thing I'll say is when I was in seminary, they introduced us to a concept called the Fishbowl, in which you put, you could put a group of young adults into a center of the room and just let them have a conversation. Don't say anything. Just let them talk. You be the observers, hear their conversation. And then, after the conversation's over, then take the time to ask questions about things and, wow, I didn't know that was important to you. Or, I think, again, I think we talk a lot, but we don't always listen. So sometimes it's just, being empathetic and listening and hearing the conversation that's going on.
Anne or Teresa, do you have anything that shimmered for you as you listened today?
For me, it was helpful to hear the 10 things that we don't have to have. Now we don't have those excuses. What do we need to do next?
Yeah. Thanks.
Good and frightening all at the same time. I appreciated, I guess, Daniel, what you had said, being called a prophetic young leader and how important that was to you, that somebody saw you whole and able, ready to go forward. And I didn't participate live, but I did go back and watch Young, Gifted, and Black. And that was a couple of weeks back. And I think Zion and Lim talked a lot. A couple of young men who are preteens. I might get that wrong, that detail, but they exhibit what I think you're talking about, is they are seen whole and valued and challenged to live their faith as God has made them. They don't have to change or become something they are not, but they have a faith family, a congregation, and a community that is supporting them. And that, just those pieces coming together is what I think I'm hearing and makes me excited about growing a young congregation. It's being open to the next generations coming up and how they're going to lead us, kind of stepping back, like Reverend Dr. Lawrence Clark has said, step back. You guys are so capable. And I'm so excited to be able to be a small part of it, but kind of a cheerleader from the background.
Thanks.
When I hear the importance of having, creating a safe space to explore and discover who you are so that you can live in that space. So a safe and grace place. Reclaiming that as the church, I think, would do so much for us to all be able to live from that place, regardless of our age. That's, I think, how we'll be the full body of Christ.
I think so too. The question that they didn't ask us was about how we've been invited into leadership or how we wish we had been. And I, because of timing. And really, what I would love to share with just every human who wants to work with young people is that we possess the same diversity of giftedness that the whole body of Christ does, that the whole church does. And so when the spaces for us to engage are as a camp counselor or as a young adult in global mission, that engages some of our folks, that are folks who want to work with children, that's great. But there's a range of gifts, and so being equipped in them and having space to explore them and how they relate to our vocational call in and outside the walls of the church, I think are important. The last piece that I would love to say is I would love to just see what every church council or church vision team or whatever name you use for your church leadership, to just see what the reaction would be to say, have you considered having a 24-year-old be your council president? Not just be on council as your young person representative, but after they've been on council, would your council elect them to be your council president? If they had the gifts, obviously not just because they're young, that would be silly, right? But if they had giftedness or the capacity and time and interest in doing that. Because I think often we're like, great, we have a young person, and we even put them on council. And I think it's different than fully recognizing and seeing them as a leader.
Thank you.
Amen. I wasn't going to share this, but I'm going to share this now. I was elected to the church council as a 17-year-old. And there was a big fight. My church there was a big fight about whether I could do it or not. And it was interesting because then the council president resigned. And you know what happens when the council president resigns? The vice president becomes the council president. So at the age of 17, believe it or not, I was the council president of our local congregation. And, you know, again, the people believed in my leadership and had trained me well enough and I was capable enough to be able to step into that role and be able to lead even in the midst of my young age and all of that other stuff. So it's possible. But again, we have to work with people just like we have to work with anybody else, whether they're, 100 years old or if they're 20 years old, we still have to work with them. So it does happen.
What do you all see as your next faithful step? Would you be willing to share that with us?
Tammy, that's such a tough question because we're being presented with so many opportunities that are crying out for our attention and our time and our energy. And so for me, really, at this point, my next faithful step is to continue to engage. But beyond that, honestly, I'm already committed in several other directions. And that's the commitment I'm able to make authentically at this time, is just to continue to engage with this conversation and to learn.
I think that's
Thank
great.
you.
You have to start a whole ministry as your next most faithful step. Please. That's not the ask. It could be to pick up the phone and say hi.
For me, and we're actually already involved in it, is we have grown our council young already. So we have 2 young adults that are on our council. We have 2 males, young adults that are on our council. One is the secretary of the council, and the other one's about to become the finance chair. So it's going to be interesting because we really literally are giving the keys over to the young people, the young adults to lead us. And they have some ideals. They have some different visions of things. And I think that's good. I'm excited about the possibilities. So I'm going to continue to support them in these efforts of them, stepping up and taking a leadership role. So.
Thank you.
Well, our congregation just called a part-time youth and family coordinator. And as I was listening to the 2 of you present this morning, I thought, my next faithful step is to strongly recommend that the leaders of our church listen to this particular Wednesday morning call. And our congregation is very close to Pasadena and Fuller Seminary. We have a member of the congregation who is attending Fuller. So I see several possibilities, but I was also, I was really struck by one of your comments, Daniel, and that was that the welcoming has to be systematic and not performed. And that's going to stick with me for a long time. But my faithful step is to recommend that the powers that be listen to this particular call.
So Daniel, you're needing to leave now.
It's been so great to be with you all. And I just want to say thank you because it's a hopeful conversation as naysayery as Claire and I can be. We're here because we live in hope, and seeing everybody here is part of that. So thank you.
So good to be with you again, Daniel. Blessings.
Great
Have
to
a
see
good
you.
meeting. Yep.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else wanting to share a next faithful step before we head into prayer?
Mine is to have a conversation with my supervisor of my internship site and see what this church does and what needs to be changed.
Thanks.
And Tammy, I would say I just need to let it permeate me. I'm new to Tucson as a congregation, and I'm not even a member, but the pandemic has me here, and I know the Lord can use me, and I don't know what my next faithful step would be, but certainly I know the Spirit will prod me when the time is right to keep that message alive, however it comes forward. So, sorry, that was, but to listen, to meditate on these things and see where the Spirit leads me. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So as the reminder to listen, I invite us into a word of prayer where we're listening to our hearts. We're listening for what God is inviting. And so the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
And also with you.
I'll begin with an opening prayer, and I invite you to jump in with any prayer concerns or any kind of petition that might be heavy on your heart. Gracious God, we thank you for this day and this time and this ability to connect with one another. We pray, Lord, for all those who are struggling to connect, whether that's through reasons because of COVID, because of not feeling welcome. We pray, Lord, that you would help us to listen to those needs, to be open to and discerning about ways that are welcoming, and for us to take the steps, for us to grow into the fullness of who you've created us to be as your servant. Lord, in your mercy.
Hear our prayer.
I'm thankful for the hope that Daniel shared, for Lim, for Zion, for the pastor there, for my congregation in Juneau. Lord, thank you for working and the lives coming behind us. It is so encouraging. I know that you are with us, that you have a plan for our lives. Help us to be open and ready to receive open-handedly. Lord, in your mercy.
Hear our prayer.
Hear our prayer.
And I pray we'll quit being so quick to say, oh, we can't do that, and work at having our first impulse be, well, let's give it a try and see what happens. We have many things to learn from young people, and particularly when it comes to paying attention to how we heal our communities and our country. Lord, in your mercy.
Hear our
Hear our
prayer.
prayer.
Lord, we lift up these prayers, those spoken and those unspoken, those that you are aware of, that are on our hearts and are in our minds. Bless us now as we are apart one from another. Grace us with your presence and remind us that you walk with us every step of the way. Until we meet again next week. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Tammy.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, blessings, and look forward to seeing you all next time.
Good blessings to you
Bye-bye.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.